I'm sure, yeah. It has to
A
be.
lot of people
Impressive technical achievement.
Yeah, it would be. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack, here at KubeCon CloudNativeCon in Seattle. And today I am with Cheryl Hung, who is Director of Ecosystems at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Hi, Cheryl. Good to see you again.
Hey, Alex. Good to see you.
And Matt Klein is Senior Software Engineer at Lyft. Hi, Matt.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Listen, I wanted to talk a little bit about projects in the CNCF and really about their life cycle, how they flow through the CNCF, so to speak. And so perhaps we can start with Matt, is like, how is it, tell us a little bit about the process you've gone through and working with the CNCF in terms of your open source project that you've been focusing on Envoy.
Sure. So for those of you out there that don't know, we started a project called Envoy, which is a network proxy. It was started at Lyft. The project started about 3.5 years ago, and we open sourced it about 2.5 years ago. And so we had open source Envoy as a 1.0 release. It was used in production, already battle tested. And then about a year later, in I think September of 2017, we joined the CNCF as an incubating project, and that's overall been a great experience for us. The CNCF has been very helpful for helping us grow the project, not only from events perspective, but helping with governance and just all those types of things. So Envoy has had pretty spectacular growth over the last 2 years since it's been open sourced. And I think just through natural project growth and evolution, especially during 2018, it became clear that it was time to look at the graduating criteria. So we worked with the CNCF to see if we satisfied all of those goals, and then went for the vote, and that went through a couple of weeks ago. And it's been great. I think it's a great testament to the maturity of the project and the faith that the larger industry has in it moving forward.
So, Cheryl, maybe you could help us go through this a little bit too. So every CNCF project has an associated maturity level, correct?
Right.
What does that mean? So what do you mean when you're thinking, when like, if I have an open source project, do I basically have to help define what that maturity is of that project, and then I come forward and discuss it?
So the CNCF, we do define certain criteria to be at each level. And the driver for this is really that there are a ton of open source projects out there, and it can be quite difficult to tell, how much has this been adopted, what's the longevity of it, can I rely on this to build my product and my organization on this open source project? Can I trust that it's going to be around? So the maturity levels are a way of saying at the graduation level, this is something that's battle tested and got good adoption and good traction. And then the incubating level is a step below that, where it's gotten some movement but maybe doesn't have all the formal processes around it. And then the sandbox level is the real cutting edge, maybe smaller and more buggy projects that are coming in to fill the gaps that are not already done.
Where did the Envoy project start?
We started as an incubating project, and I think that was mostly because we already had very widespread production use at Lyft. So I think we were fairly confident that it had a basic level of stability that made it acceptable to other users who might want to pick it up. The reason, obviously, that we started at incubation is that Lyft at that time was the only user. Right. A lot has changed in the last 2.5 years.
Right. So to accept it into that incubation stage, then you need to show that it's been used in production.
Correct.
And what are you looking for? What are you looking for when it's being used in production? You're looking for multiple examples of that, right?
So a lot of this comes down to the judgment of the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee. The CNCF itself does not dictate whether a project should be at this level or even should be part of the CNCF. And the TOC are the community technical experts and evangelists who are elected and serve a certain number of terms, and they make the judgment about whether the production use cases are sufficiently mature to warrant being moved to a certain level.
Okay. So there were obviously then multiple users for Envoy at the time.
For at the incubating stage?
Yeah.
No, there was just Lyft.
So it was just Lyft.
Yeah.
And so is that an example where there is just one organization using the project?
There's no problem with one organization using a project or contributing majority of the code to the project. But in order to become a graduating project, and this is what Envoy has really done a really great job of, is expanding that so that multiple organizations can use Envoy and multiple organizations can contribute to it as well, which shows that it's not tied to just Lyft's infrastructure or Lyft's use cases. It actually serves a broader need for the community.
So when we're looking at projects that have graduated, what have been the projects that have graduated? We have Kubernetes,
Prometheus, and Envoy.
So you go to the third.
Yeah.
So at that graduation stage, I'm looking at kind of the criteria that you have on GitHub. You have committers from at least 2 organizations. How many committers do you have now?
I think in Envoy, at this point, I want to say we have 10 or 11 maintainers from 5 different organizations. And just for perspective from on the Envoy side, obviously when we open sourced it at Lyft, Lyft was the only people writing code, and actually I wrote the majority of the code myself. If you actually look at the data over the last couple of years, and there was a great presentation that I'll plug from yesterday's Envoy Con, where Harvey, one of the maintainers, did a analysis of project contributions over time. Lyft's contribution has actually, you see it start here, and it's actually declined, and then there's a curve going up from Google, and now we have a curve going up from all types of other players. So it really has gone through 3 stages of a Lyft only project, a Lyft Google project, and now Lyft, Google, and a whole bunch of other people. So as was just said, I think what the CNCF is looking for is a sustainable maintenance system, such that if one person or one company, for example, were to pull out, it wouldn't mean that the project would go away. And I think from Envoy, we have clearly achieved that. I think the project is now ultimately self-sustaining.
Yeah, that is super important, because some organizations who want to support open source will take a piece of their code and just dump it on GitHub, and that's not a community. Like, yes, you can download the code, but once that organization loses interest, that's going to be a dying project. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen for Cloud Native.
Is that a sign of a dying project then, when they just throw it out there like that?
It's a sign that they have not thought about the governance of the project. The project itself may be technically great, but most things need maintenance over time, and for that you need a group of people who are passionate about it and devoted and will really put time and effort into it.
So there's also then this best practices badge. What is that? And then tell me about how Envoy achieved and maintained their core infrastructure initiative best practices badge.
To be perfectly honest, we did it a long time ago, so I'm not going to be able to tick off all
what does it mean, or what does it mean generally?
So I think in general, there's a set of modern software development best practices. So those are types of testing. Do you do static analysis? Do you run CI? I don't remember exactly what the individual things are, but the best practices badge, it lists out a set of, I think, what most people would consider to be common software development best practices, and takes a project through making sure that all of those are actually done by the project, and then the badge is granted.
So can you tell us then a little bit about the Prometheus and Kubernetes projects? And they did graduate, and I'm curious on what the impacts of those projects graduating. You're trying to look for how it'll affect the end users, right? So Kubernetes and Prometheus and Envoy. So what are you looking for there?
So Dan Cohn of the CNCF has been talking a lot recently about this crossing the chasm model. So going from the really early stage adopters who are willing to accept disruption and change and do a lot of individual work with the projects to something where the majority can actually adopt it because it's stable and there are well understood paradigms around it. And what graduation really means is it's ready to be adopted, or it has been adopted by the majority. So that includes things like, does it follow software engineering best practices? Is there a good community around it from more than one organization? And an end user can look at this and say, well, if I'm betting the next 5 years of my technical strategy on an orchestrator, then what's a good solution for me? Well, Kubernetes has shown that it's gotten traction in many companies, and many companies have used it successfully.
And so with Envoy, what is the usage now? What is it? And now that it's graduated, what's that next step for you?
The growth has been absolutely incredible.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. Obviously when we started open source, not even 2.5 years ago, it was just Lyft. As of recently, Envoy, there are managed products by all three major clouds. So that's Azure, Google, and Amazon have all announced Envoy managed products. We have end users that span the entire industry, really. So really all of Lyft's peer companies to larger companies like Google are using it internally. We have tens of startups at this point that are building their own products and services on top of Envoy, and that really happened before we became a graduated project. I mean, the growth has been organic. So I think when you're asking, what does graduation mean or what does it change, I don't think it actually changes anything specifically about how the project will operate. I think it's a sign of confidence that may let some end users that might be a little more risk averse, it might give them the confidence that, again, the project is not just going to disappear. It's not abandonware that's going to be sitting on GitHub.
Yeah. It has the cap and gown now, right?
It is. It's a recognition that the projects are stable enough that users can really rely on them. And this, when I first got involved with the CNCF, there were maybe 4 or 5 projects, and users had a shot at understanding what each of those meant. And now the CNCF has 30 or more projects.
And is that in the sandbox and incubator?
I honestly cannot tell you the total number. It's 30 something, including sandbox.
Including sandbox. Yeah. Okay, that's all I need to know.
Yeah. So now I talk to a lot of companies who are like, well, we know we need to choose something from these projects, and we don't have the time to actually investigate every single project, especially if they're a very small company. So for that, I think the maturity level is just a really basic indication of like, what is the level of engagement that I, as an end user, would have to work with this project? Can I rely on it being mature enough that I can just use it more or less as is, or will I be engaging directly with the project contributors to fix bugs myself? And those will take you down different paths.
But what is the CNCF looking for initially in their projects? Are they supposed to fit with Kubernetes? Are they supposed to fit with technology infrastructure? You could have any project necessarily come into it and have nothing really to do with the existing projects themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cloud native is not Kubernetes. I mean, Netflix was cloud native on VMs before Kubernetes was really a thing. And so the question is, do the projects fit into the paradigm of scalability and elasticity and dynamic provisioning, rather than like, well, do they interact well with Kubernetes?
Well, right, and I mean, if you look at Envoy specifically, Envoy actually has nothing to do with Kubernetes directly, and we see it, by many measures, Envoy has had faster uptake than Kubernetes itself, and that's because Envoy is used in all kinds of environments, from container environments to bare metal to VMs to functional services. Obviously, it's being used a lot with Kubernetes, so they're a very natural fit with each other. But it's not like every project has to be, directly compatible with Kubernetes.
Out of curiosity, do you know of Envoy deployments, how many of those use Kubernetes or not?
To be honest, I don't. If I had to guess, I would say the majority do not. That would be my guess, because I think quite a few people have Envoy in production at this point, and I think many of them they're all looking at Kubernetes, or they may have Kubernetes deployments, but I know of many non-Kubernetes Envoy deployments. So if I had to guess, I don't know. I'm guessing more are not in Kubernetes than are in Kubernetes. Though over time, I would expect that to change.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And so you started as an incubator project. Was there a sandbox there at the time?
I don't remember, actually.
I don't think so.
No, there was something. There was Inception,
yeah.
I think. I think at the time there was Inception, incubating, graduating, and I think, as was said before, I think it's up to the TOC in terms of where projects come in. I suspect primarily because of Envoy's production usage at a scale as large as Lyft was at the time that we entered the CNCF. I think it was deemed okay for incubation.
Yeah, definitely. There's no requirement that projects must come in at the sandbox level.
No. But when they do come in as a sandbox, they're really young projects. Are they young? Would they be younger than Envoy was at the time?
Potentially,
yeah. Right. And so then is it the technical oversight committee who decides if they're a sandbox or an incubator project, or they're not accepted at all?
Yeah, usually projects will request to come in at a certain level. They will make their own judgment about whether they feel ready. I mean, the criteria are all published on GitHub, as you saw, so everybody can check that out. But then it is up to the technical judgment of the TOC whether to say that this project is ready to live at this level.
Are you spending a lot more time looking at potential incoming projects?
There is a very long list of projects that want to join the CNCF, which is fantastic because it means that the CNCF has been a valuable home to projects. And it's also a challenge because now, with 30-odd projects, if we get to 60-odd projects, it's going to get ever harder to make sure that the projects are well governed and get what they need from the CNCF.
What have been some of the new projects that have joined the sandbox? Well, there's ping caps, there are databases, right? There's a lot.
Yeah, I can name them and roughly what they do, but as to the exact status of them, like, even I don't know about you, but even I can't stay on top of all of them.
No clue, sorry.
Yeah.
So those projects that are coming in, the TOC decides if they get accepted. And
Correct.
What is the criteria that the TOC sets?
That's what is listed on GitHub.
Yeah.
The criteria about how many committers and how many organizations, how many production use cases are running, that sort of thing. There is some individual judgment in it, but for the most part we try and keep it objective so that it's easy for people to understand and users to understand the meaning of these different levels.
It's kind of fascinating. It's kind of like watching farm teams or something like, or or like these very kind of nascent kind of talent and technologies that are coming through. What are some of the projects now in the incubator stage that are looking to having momentum that we can expect them to graduate?
I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about them.
In terms of commits, I mean, who are you seeing kind of like rise in terms of commits and interest level?
So this is publicly available, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it is.
That certain projects, it's more recognition of where they are rather than necessarily an indication of momentum. So for instance, Container D, which is pretty well tested by this point, I would say, is coming up for graduation pretty soon.
Right.
There's probably a couple others. Right.
Fluency, I know, has been very popular. There's lots of them that have been, that are starting to grow.
I think this is also a little bit of a challenge in that once you put a label like graduation out, every project wants to get to that graduation level.
Right.
So.
But you're not necessarily thinking of a pipeline, were you? I mean, you weren't thinking about that. You were just thinking about what were you thinking about when you were coming into the CNCF? What was it that was like the impetus for it?
To be honest, Envoy is a very peculiar duck, I think, for most of the projects. And the reason that I say that is that there is actually not a corporate entity behind Envoy. So, people want to come into CNCF for a variety of different reasons. Some of them are recognition, some of them are business implications, some of them are neutral governance, help with various things. For me, because there was no Envoy business, the primary motivation of joining CNCF was to get help with project management and governance more actively than I was getting from Lyft, right? So for example, CNCF has full-time PR and marketing people that can help. They have people that are experts in open source that can help with government. They have event planners. These are resources that I didn't really have available to me at Lyft in that way. So I'll be honest in saying that I think people want to enter CNCF for different reasons. For me, I've been less focused on are we incubation or sandbox or graduated versus I am very, very busy and trying to get help with some of the other stuff, and that's what the CNCF has been great for.
Did you realize that it was going to be as much, there's going to be much work as it was? Have you had experience with projects like this before? I mean, this project has just taken off so much. It has to. I mean, now the people who are maintaining the project really have a lot on their plates.
I mean, so first, this is my first experience with open source, really, like in terms of being a maintainer of a project, and Envoy is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I mean, like, the growth has been just stupendous. So, no, I don't think I had any idea what I was.
Can you give us a picture of that growth? And
by which metric?
By a metric that you're thinking about. I mean, you're thinking.
I guess. I'm trying to. I don't have the numbers on the top. Of my head.
I don't need exact numbers. I'm just looking for like.
But just to give you, I guess, perspective. When we open source and we had a couple of maintainers and I was doing the majority of code reviews. Maybe we were probably merging, a couple of pull requests per week or something like that, right? I mean, now for reference, we have, I think, probably on average 30 or 40 pull requests open at any one time, and we merge probably 10 commits per day. So, I mean, just from a review maintenance perspective, that's not a lot compared to Kubernetes, but Kubernetes has that many more people working on it. But for the personnel that we have, I mean, it's a lot. So if you look at just the code reviews and then all of the excitement around Envoy and the vendors and the other people that are building businesses on top, I spend a large part of my time now. I barely write code anymore. I mean, I spend a lot of my time doing stuff like this, which is great because it raises awareness and it's super important. But there's a lot of non-technical things that go into growing a project that are incredibly time consuming that I think I didn't really understand before we started.
I think this is something that the CNCF does focus on, like the community side, the awareness. things beyond the code that are actually necessary, technical documentation, things that really make sure that, projects like Envoy can succeed. And I hope that you would feel that other projects could make the CNCF at home as well and get the support.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's always a dialogue out there in the larger community as to, how the CNCF can help more. And of course, there's limited funds and it's a complicated thing. And, so I think there's always a dialogue that's going to happen around what's the best way to help the existing projects. But that really is the benefit that I think that the CNCF provides, which is a lot of these non-technical things that are very important for project success and are typically not invested in as much as they should be.
And so how do you prepare the people coming into these projects, because they do have the potential to grow, they have the potential to be larger projects. Not every project is going to be on the size of Kubernetes or Prometheus or Envoy, but how do you prepare them for that? Because I imagine for a lot of people this is quite new.
I think the thing is to find people who want to do this kind of thing. I mean, yeah. I've managed people in a previous life, and you give people more of what they want to do. So some people like Matt are great at going out and doing the public evangelizing as well as the technical side. But it's okay, not everybody has to do that as well. Some people may want to contribute in other ways, or they may want to focus purely on maintaining the project itself. So I think it's about finding the right people and identifying those people who actually want to be out there and part of the community. But one thing that's great about this community is that there are so many people who've come and who are willing to give up their time and their energy to be part of it. And I think that's something that you don't see very often.
So Matt, you don't have any timeline yourself. You just will continue to working on the project, I expect.
That's tough to say. We'll have to do another podcast on that. No, I mean, there's a larger and more interesting question that I think is probably a little out of scope for this conversation, just in terms of how a lot of the effort that goes into these projects is actually funded.
Yeah.
Right now, most of the funding comes indirectly through employers. Like I work for Lyft, or a bunch of people work for Google.
Yeah.
Right. And it can get complex to figure out how to balance the needs of the company that one works for with a bunch of the open source and other stuff that also needs to happen, and a bunch of the benefits that come to these companies. They're hard to measure, right? So for example, I'm out here and it's great visibility for Lyft, and that's fantastic, and Lyft appreciates that, but it's hard to quantify exactly how much that matters to Lyft versus its day-to-day business concerns. And I think there are lots of people working for different projects that are in similar position. So I think over the next few years, I think there will continue to be more dialogue about how some of this work is funded, like who people work for, and there's no easy answers here. It's a pretty complex thing.
Very, very much so. I mean, many companies now want to be part of open source or to run open source programs internally, but that requires cultural changes as well as, they have to understand the value to the business beyond that. You're building your own company's product.
Well, Matt and Cheryl, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to you here at KubeCon. Have a great show and a great end of the year, and I'm sure we'll talk again in 2019.
I definitely hope so. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.
And Matt.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Mics are off, put them down, talk amongst yourselves while we look at the screens.